All right, good afternoon, everyone. It is Tuesday, November 14th at 3:01 p.m. So we should call this board work session to order. And we'll start with a roll call from the board work sessions that I can go around the whole table. That way we know everyone who's here for our discussion today. So I'll start and we'll go this way. That's okay. So Carly Cooper, I'm stated pronouns and Director of District 1.
Charlie Simpson, District 3.
Aaron Bonanno, Human Resources.
Allison Pino, Executive Director of Multilingual and Community Schools.
Jeff Baker, Executive Director of CTE Data and Technology Services.
Naomi Berto, Director of Communications and Community Engagement.
Greg Woodard, Chief Financial Officer.
Drummond, Director of Special Education.
Scott Whitbeck, Chief Academic Officer. Dr.
Dr. Superintendent.
Jan Muller, Jack, District 2. So thank you all so much just for that. Give us a second to take a collective breath. I really show. All right, folks, and welcome to our guests, both here in person, as well as joining us online and forever, whoever we might see in the future. So our first item is to open up for public comment. So what? No?
Big will do public comment.
So we have no public comment. Okay, great. Well, still opening public comment just in case, but I actually don't want to see no one online. So no public comment today. So looking to our presentations, beginning with the special education update.
Wonderful. Should I stay here or get up?
Whatever we should feel comfortable. If you want to
Here.
go time, that's great.
Great for me. All right, so as I just shared, I'm Ann Drummond, I'm the Director of Special Education, and I'm excited to be here today to talk about our priorities for special education in the Tukwila School District. And also, I will take any opportunity to champion the work on behalf of staff who are working for our students who qualify for special education services. So excited to be here for that. With all things, we want to make sure that there's a through line of our goals to our strategic plan as a district. So making sure that we are looking at this and looking at our learners, looking at high expectations and relationships and equity and empathy in our work. And that needs to create a through line into everything that we do, including and especially when we talk about how we serve some of our most vulnerable students and what their needs are. And so in that, we're looking at the equity analysis questions from the toolkit. And so anytime that we are looking at district decision-making, district policy, everything, we want to make sure that we're asking these questions. And who are the impacted students? For the purposes of today's presentation, I'm going to be talking about students who qualify for special education services. So that is a subgroup of students. And at the same time, we'll get further into the work we've been talking about disproportionality and students who have been identified for special education, and that we are disproportionate as a district and some opportunities to remedy that and push us in the other direction. And so really looking at that and thinking about how are we serving our students in that way. So this is just a grounding questions for guiding that work. Just from a very high level perspective, I just want to make sure that we all know that special education is driven and governed by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. We use a lot of acronyms in special education, and so I am committed to always working on trying not to use acronyms when I'm in groups, and I also will do it from time to time. Please correct me, touch me, and say, hey, I don't know what that is, what does that mean? And so really what we're talking about is ensuring that students have a free, appropriate public education. So looking at students who qualify for special education services and making sure that they have access to their education in their least restrictive environment. What that looks like for different students is different things. It's all individualized, and it's an IEP team that comes together and makes those decisions about what that looks like for each individual student. But again, really focusing on free no cost to families, and appropriate public education. I really just wanted to kind of pause on this point and just call out that students who qualify for special education services are general education students. We are talking about all of our students. We are talking about making sure that their needs are met in the general education setting. You've maybe heard this before, and oftentimes people might say students who qualify for special education services are general education students first. And that word at the end, I dropped it intentionally because I want to be clear that students who qualify for special education services are general education students, period. End of sentence. Like, and just really making sure that we're focused on that and realizing that in everything that we do to support their needs. And the needs of their families, you know, making sure that we're respecting their rights. So I just wanted to call that out and acknowledge that. And then I also wanted to just share, we often talk about special education in a classroom, or where does it take place? And I just want to just be really clear here that it's a service, it's not a place. It can take place in a school anywhere, but it's not like a specific classroom. It's not like we have a classroom for students who qualify for special education services and they go here. It's not that. We can provide services within the general education setting. We can provide services in small group settings. We can provide services definitely in a pull-out setting, but really looking at services on a continuum, everything from general education classroom to students who are in residential. Like, there's a whole continuum and broad range of services that students can qualify for, and that really comes down to each individual team, including the family of that student and the student themselves. So I just wanted to just make sure that we acknowledge that and share that, and I will shout that from the rooftops any chance I get that it's really, we're talking about services, we're not talking about places.
I mean, you talk a little bit about, because in terms of places, we hear about LRC1 and LRC2, can you talk about how it fits into the picture?
Yeah, so again, like really thinking about like our continuum of services. So here in Tukwila, every district has the program labels that they call, and it's more to kind of help ground us in organizing staffing structures, how we allocate resources, that kind of a thing. But in Tukwila, we have LRC1 and LRC2, Learning Resource 1, Learning Resource 2. And then beyond that, we have students that qualify for services in non-public agencies. And you'll hear like out of district. And so those are students who are served in an out of district setting in a non-public agency. And so in the LRC1, Learning Resource 1 classroom, we're looking really kind of at students who have qualified for services in some, maybe not all, and that their needs are not as significantly great, where they might just qualify in a couple of areas. They might need support with reading, support with math, support with social emotional, and that we're looking at a percentage of their day where they're spending time in special education. And so you might see students in an LRC1 also on a continuum of like, they might spend like 80 to anywhere between probably like 60–70% of their day in the general education setting, and some of their day in a special education, or all of their day in a gen ed setting with push-in support from a special education team. In our LRC2, Learning Resource 2 program, and that staffing model for LRC1 is 30 students to 1 teacher. In our LRC2, Learning Resource 2, we have identified students with more significant needs. They might need more social, emotional, adaptive support, functional skills, life skills, along with academics, and that they have IEP teams have determined that students who need more support, they might struggle more with transitions throughout the day, and they need a more supportive environment. And that classroom has a smaller student to staff ratio. So you'll have 12 students in that classroom versus 30, as an example. But again, it's all individualized, and all individual IEP teams will come together and make decisions about what that looks like for each student within that program. So we wouldn't want to say that just because a student is in an LRC2 program means that they are spending their whole day in the special education setting. That's not that's not what we would wanna see. We'd wanna see like what is the team talking about if we're looking at opportunities for inclusion? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I do understand that there's things in the funding formula that actually give us a little more money if the student is 80%, I think is the magic number.
Mm-hmm.
In the general education classroom, is that something, obviously that's gonna be individualized depending on,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but is that an overall goal that we're achieving?
It's an interesting question that I'm not sure I can fully answer right now. What I can say is that when, what he's referring to is that we do a monthly count. So we look at how many students who qualify for special education services each month at the beginning of the month, and then we submit that number to the state. We call it the count. And we do it in a tiered way. So tier 1 is looking at students with the 80 to 100% as their least restrictive environment. So they're in a gen ed setting for most of their day. And then tier 2 is students who spend more time of their day in a special education setting. So are we meeting that? What we're doing right now is we're serving the IEPs of the students that we have, and we know that we have opportunities for more inclusion and looking at how we're going to support students in more inclusive settings. And individual school teams look at that, individual IEP teams look at that and think about how are we going to serve our students on a continuum versus this is a model and like these are the minutes that go with this program. So we want to make sure that we're not doing that. So I don't know that that fully answers your question,
Yeah, I'm just wondering if, the fact that there's a little more money that comes with students who are at 80%, does that drive a model that would be more of a, you know, a pushed in model rather than a pull out model? It seems like, because if you can, I mean, we talked about that, you know, LPG and things like that, so because we actually get more money, and I don't know how successful we're being successful doing that. Is it something we're trying to do?
We are definitely trying to increase inclusionary practices,
Okay.
yes, and I will say that that specific focus of trying to get to that 80% indicator is not a current priority in the sense that we have a lot of priorities. And at the same time, by focusing on inclusionary practices, we will push closer to that number. And as we're looking at how we serve our students overall.
And our goal is to serve the students, right, what they need is the number one goal.
Right.
But we also recognize where there are opportunities for inclusion, where we continue to do that. And one of the things we just did actually last week or 2 weeks ago, that we are actually submitting an application to be part of the Inclusionary Practices Project through WASA. And they actually started their, they already accepted their folks, but guess what? They're gonna allow Tacoma to join, even though we're late, and so we're gonna do some little, thank you. Chief Whitman and this mom, we all met with them and we're submitting that and they're accepting us into their cohort for this year. So we are gonna be part of the inclusionary practices for the whole district.
Yeah.
So that's work that we're gonna do. We're gonna sort of consider this a foundation here and building out what that looks like in the long term, but and that's at no cost to the district.
Yeah.
So I just want to let you know that that is something that, so what I'm saying is inclusion is our goal. But as you all can imagine, it is not it's a very complex thing. And so it is the.
Yeah, I just want to make sure.
But yeah, I want to see
If we're not being able to, I guess I'm interested in if there's any
Yeah.
barriers that you bump up against while you're trying to do inclusionary practices that maybe some more money would help with, maybe because then let us know. Because
Absolutely, yeah, and I appreciate that and know that we're always looking to partner and look at opportunities for funding sources. And at the same time, as Dr. Cardoza said, our focus first and foremost is what are the needs of our students? And we know that not all students can benefit. And so sometimes being in the general education setting is more restrictive for them because they're not able to access the education in a way that is meaningful for them. And so we have to look at that and balance that at the same time. And trying to get to that indicator of just to get more money isn't and always what's in best interest of the student. And so that's why it really comes down to individual IEP teams to make decisions about like the needs of students. And then us structurally as a district, really looking at what are the systems that we can put in place that can drive ensuring that our staff have the resources, the training, the opportunities for collaboration, those things that make inclusion successful. So, yeah.
Can I ask a little bit of a question about the IEP process? How often are IEPs revisited?
So they can be revisited anytime anybody on the IEP team has a reason to come together. Required annually, minimum annually. So we are required, so evaluations drive IEPs. Evaluations are required at the minimum every 3 years. IEPs are required every single year. And so and at the same time, if there's a student who's not making progress on their goals or a student who's made progress and has met all of their goals, let's call the IEP team back together, and that can be off cycle. It doesn't have to follow that annual cadence. Or a family has a question and they want to like talk about additional services or something like that, then we can call an IEP team. So we're required to do it at a minimum of annually.
And then similarly, on that same note, does the IEP impact classroom placement, or does classroom placement typically come before the IEP review?
So this is, it's a very complicated and nuanced thing, and I am always talking with teams about the IEP drives student placement. And so it's not about classroom placement, it's about what are the needs of the students. Let's identify all of the needs of the students, let's document that. So that's why in the individualized education plan, the IEP, we're wanting to make sure, like, what are the goals? What are their present levels? Where are they at? What are they able to do? And where do we want to get them to be? And by the end of that annual year, then looking at all of that in the areas in which they qualify, then the team comes together and says, okay, what do the minutes of specially designed instruction look like for each of those areas? And then they say, okay, now where are we going to serve that? Are we going to serve it in a general education setting? Are we going to serve it in a special education setting? And so classroom placement does fall on that continuum, but we want to make sure that we're looking at, this is the IEP that outlines the needs of the students. And then this is where we're going to serve this IEP. So the IEP comes first in the sense of like identifying all the needs of the student. Does that make sense?
It does, yes. Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
So I think one of the things I'm curious around, I was talking with a friend who's a teacher in a different district who has recently, they've started a co-teaching model. What's happened is a lot of the students with IEPs have been consolidated into her classroom, and then she's been given a co-teacher. And that's been really difficult. Yeah, that's the classroom model. Okay,
Yeah.
so is that what we're doing? Like, how do we? It is what we're doing, like, we're doing.
Yes, no, we are gonna go teaching. It's not, so we just had a meeting actually, it was really interesting, we just met with Foster High School to talk about that. They're talking specifically around multilingual services. We do cluster the kids most because we don't have enough special ed teachers trying to do that. But I think we also talked about what does that actually mean to build your capacity? Because sometimes you can serve a student in a general education classroom and just be monitored by a special education teacher. So not every student requires a specialized exact service depending on the content area, depending on the skill. But they do require that guidance, the support, maybe coaching, maybe the person's doing coaching to the teacher, with the teacher, maybe they're just helping design the lessons with the teachers. It looks different, right? So that's interesting that that's the model they chose, but I think ours is a little bit more the other way, and the continuum where it depends on the classes, the content areas, because we actually had to have that conversation. We don't have the staff to do co-teaching with every kid with an IEP system. So what does that mean? What does that look like? And it's hard. And so I would say, when you ask the question, how are we doing? Right? It's challenging, right? Because you're asking teachers who are phenomenal, by the way, in how they do the work, how they deliver instruction, and they're having to shift their practice, right, in a different way. And I think that is, and they're having to shift how they work with you, working with one other person, you all know, that's an interesting dynamic in itself, right? Right, you add a new entity, and you, so also this person's in your classroom, and it's all of that relationship building, that stuff takes time. So it's super complex, you know, I have to say kudos to the teachers, because, you know, digging in. And then what they're doing, what I appreciate, is they're telling us what they need. So for example, we're trying to get, so what do you need? What do you, that's why I went to the foster, right, and we talked to our leadership team, so what is it that you need, what is it we need? And we have to work on those pieces, right, but, because it's ongoing, right? So one thing that came out of one of the things from foster is, so now the team is actually designing some intentional training, on the way in the specific content areas, right? So, but it's not, I'll just be honest and say, at the end of this year, will we be exactly an exemplar in this area? No. Because we're all learning a new skill, but I will say, at the end of this year, we've learned some lessons, right? We've learned some things that are really doing well, and some things that are challenging. So I wouldn't say we're doing all that cluster mock hours, but there's coaching, there's embedded coaching as part of it, there's co-teaching, there's design, and then there is some specific co-teaching happening in the classrooms as well, so.
Yeah, so people read, Colby Valley, who's been doing, you know, trying to implement a co-teaching model specification for quite some time, and her comment was, well, in her experience, it only works 50% of the time, partly because, you know, two people have to come together and figure out how to work together. That doesn't always happen either quickly or at all, maybe.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's, yeah, like you say, it's tricky.
It's
Very tricky.
And I will thank my son, who went through high school and a co-teaching model, my daughter did too. And, you know, when I would go to conferences, you know, one of the things, sometimes you hear teachers say they would never go back. Right, so when it's done really well, and when it's supported really well, so that's the part, we're trying to find that balance between support and all of that. But when it's done really well and supported really well, and I add that for the teachers, they're listening, they hear you. But when it's done that way, then you can actually have that experience where the students are getting an exemplar classroom experience, right? And so that's the goal. But this is literally a foundation year, that's just reminding everybody, and there's some growing pains, to be honest, and we're trying to work out the growing pains. But our goal, that's why we decided to work with WASA on inclusionary practices, because we recognize that as, okay, here's an opportunity for all this training from NOVAC that's free to us in the system, where we can be part of the pilot, so we are excited about that. So it's a way to take it to the next level and really help support teachers and ourselves as a team. Like, what do we need to do to build infrastructure to support the resources, especially in the year when we're gonna have, you know, we have to monitor that a little bit.
And I think it's funny that it's like when it clicks, it's very good.
Yeah. But when it doesn't, you're right, it's, you know, and that's what we have to figure out, those nuances, but when it doesn't, what is it? Staffing, is it just maybe reworking, those are all things, is it resources, is it training, those are all.
Like peeling the onion to try to get to
Yeah.
like the magical, and we know that it's not magical, because if
Yeah.
it were, it would be, but it's very layered. Director Bullerjack, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to, I admit that I brought you lots of challenges this year with all the McKinney-Vento kids. But I'm looking at this from a school board perspective and maybe from a legislative perspective. When you look at the eligibility, our McKinney-Vento kids can't get all of that done without already spending a lot of time in the classroom and you can be traumatized. I've had a kindergartner expelled twice now. For what's called behavior, but who knows whether that kid fits in these categories. They call, you know, just every other day to tell me to come get this kid. She's doing her best.
Yeah.
But I mean, so do we need to go to the legislature to say, shortcut some, I know we can shortcut some other stuff from the McKinney-Ventos. Is there anything here we can shortcut? Or, because it's really hard to get a diagnosis, partly because they haven't been in school, they don't speak the language, and, so there's no history. And it disrupts the class for everybody else,
Yeah.
as well as for this one kid.
Yeah, so, first of all, I just wanna say that we are so excited to welcome all kids into our classrooms, and so thankful for your partnership and support in serving students, who you are welcoming into your community as we welcome them into ours. So first of all, I just wanna say that, like, I'm just so thankful and proud to work in a district where we are able to serve students with high needs. They're coming from places of a lot of different things in their background. So it's a good segue into our next slide around eligibility. And just also acknowledging that, you know, students who qualify for McKinney-Vento services, and students who move frequently, when they're struggling, when they're struggling with learning, they're struggling with trauma, they're struggling with many different things. What you're describing is real, and the fact that the process for special education services follows a compliance timeline that can be long, it can feel long. And it can feel very emotional during the process, depending on who we're supporting and who we're serving. And so that's real. That is real in classrooms. Our classroom teachers face it every single day as they welcome in students, all students with various backgrounds. And so I just want to say that first, that it is, and it's a challenge, because we also want to make sure that when we do qualify students for special education services, that we are saying that they have an identified disability. And it's highly likely that many students might, who are coming to us new, we just don't know that. And there's a lot of things that we can do. And it feels hard because in the moment, we're working with students who are coming in, and sometimes they've never been in a classroom before, and in a very structured system. We're saying, here, follow these rules, and some of those rules are unwritten. We don't tell you what the rules are, we just expect that you come in and you know that you hang up your coat and you sit at your desk and that you
Know how to school.
know how to do school, right? That's often not the case for a lot of students that especially kindergartners. And so really, and at the same time, we have a responsibility to do our due diligence in making sure that we're qualifying students who truly are eligible for those services, because there are also other things that could be in place. There could be language barriers, there could be mental health needs that are medical, that might not have an overall long-term educational impact, but there might be a medical impact, which is different from qualifying educationally. And so those are the things that our process for eligibility are supposed to rule out. And those things can take time. And at the same time, we also know that, like, students, there are opportunities that we have to look at, like, what can we do to serve this student in a shorter timeline? So that's where it really comes down to the school team, and it's gotta be student by student specific. So there's no rule that says this is what we have to do in all cases. But for criteria for eligibility for special education services,
Just
yeah.
respond to the legislature. So one thing we can do is we require some organization, because, you know, if I kind of tell that to a legislator, not so much, but we can bring the legislators in, if we can organize, you know, to hear from actually the people on the ground that are trying to work with it, that can actually, I mean, we could do that. So, but it's just, I know the situation, you know, like Kathy, it's very challenging, and whether, you know, you can pull together something like that, and it's, you know, leave that up to you guys, but we could actually bring them, they, you know, work with us.
And I think that, I just want to say, how do you let it, we just came out with a lot to when I was a former principal of you know, with immigrant refugees, you know. in language and trauma, right? Like trauma, trauma itself is not a disability, but it can become one. Like it can have adverse impact on the social or discipline. And so that's what we want to be really, really careful on, because, and some trauma is temporary and some is more permanent. And so same with language development, some people, are really good at languages, but sometimes language can be an impairment. It can be that way, even in English, right? So it can, so that's why the evaluation is really important. Because like, for example, one of the things we would do, especially with our little students, is we do the test in English. So we had to be very intentional about doing bilingual assessments in there and bring those in and make sure we're doing the same test so that we can look and compare between the English and the language development. Because sometimes, in some cases, a child who maybe is 8 years old, well, they don't have the academic language because they never went to school before. So of course, they're performing linguistically like a 5-year-old or a 4-year-old, because so we have to what my point is the evaluation is critical, because we have to tease out and rule out all of these things. And we need to make sure that when we're saying a child has a disability, that they do, because that's a big deal to say that a child has a disability, right? It is.
It follows in their entire education.
Absolutely, and their life. So I just think it's really important when we do that we're going to do that. But I will say, the second part is, that doesn't mean that we can't provide interventions, that doesn't mean we can't provide this discipline, we can do a functional behavioral analysis. You don't need an evaluation, that's a different type of evaluation that doesn't require an IEP. It could be part of it, but there's lots of things we can do instead, interventions or tutoring, all these other things we can do. So I just wanna say that evaluation of eligibility is super critical, and it has to be done very carefully.
Really, we're thinking about, combating the ways in which special education services need to get us public. So, I think just one other note that I wanna make, is I feel really icky about expelling kindergartners. So I don't know, like, I would recommend the word, we got a policy about that. We should not be expelling kindergartners. That feels really gross.
Expel versus, suspension.
How do we say expel?
They use the word expel. I think they meant suspension.
Okay, good to know, yeah. I just want to be really clear, expel means
They're no longer
the
Yeah.
But you're talking, so they're still going to school, they're suspended,
They
correct?
were suspended for 2 days.
Okay, that's a suspension.
Yeah.
Was there more information provided on the behavioral problem that, or?
Yeah, I think.
Oh, yeah, I know exactly what happened in the classroom. And I guess one of my other questions is, does each school have someone who's trained in hands-on restraint? Because I do believe this kindergartner on top. So that respond beautifully to the hands-on restraint. But my understanding is there was no one in that classroom who can do that. So instead, they evacuated the rest of the class because she was taking chairs over.
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that, and I hear you bringing up some examples and areas of concern, and I also just wanna make sure that, like, just generally speaking, we're not, talking specifically about a specific student in a scenario in this setting, which is very public. And one of the things that I appreciate that you're bringing up, and I appreciate you sharing, bringing the legislature in. We're talking about a general education challenge. We're talking about basic education for all students, and making sure that we're supporting that and looking at that, like from that's our core. That is where we're at. And so when we look at how we're serving students that come with all the things that they come, and I gotta tell you, kids who have behavior challenges are my favorite kids. I relate and connect with them the most. It's hard though, it's challenging and it's emotional for everybody. And we do have staff in all of our schools who are trained on de-escalation strategies, including and the focus is de-escalation. The focus is not learning how to put our hands on physical intervention with students. we do have staff trained, we do not have staff in every single classroom trained, and that is a last resort. We do not want to put our hands on students. We want to be able to de-escalate prior to that. So,
One more point, sorry. With regard to the legislature, the other, so we're talking about doing all this stuff. And within the context of McKinney student and refugee student. And those two are big issues because for me, because the legislature, our legislature doesn't fund either of those categories, which is a big problem. And when you layer that, all this comes out of each other. That's the education portion for me that legislators need to understand. When you layer all this on top of, McKinney and refugee, then that's when it, we need the funding for, more McKinney.
And what I'm interested in is, so as our kids, Alicia, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but so many times our kids are not monolithic, right? So you have a child who may be this race, have this language, on and on and on. So where can we get flexibility, like in that? That is really the trick, and the question that I would love to ask as opposed to the legislators is where do we get flexibility in the funding so that we can serve our students more in a holistic way? Because right now, we just talked about something for funding that we're doing to support, and we're like, we'll fund from here, we'll do this, and we'll do what we can use this money because of this, so that is where I think we could maybe push on the state. Because if we know that we have that intersectional leadership and all these things, so but we don't fund anything that way. So how do we do that so that we can be more flexible with how we're serving students? Because for some students, the trauma, like maybe they have a student with an IEP, but the trauma work, right, like all that discipline work and everything, that might be the core work to get them to access the classroom. But, and then where they can access their academics, so if it's individual, then we need flexibility, so that's the pieces, we need flexibility. And to look at some of these things, because our students, sometimes they fall into many categories, and the funding isn't following, the money isn't following in the way that it's designed or intended.
right. And I also, just from a perspective of what's first and foremost best for students, and then also what is fiscally responsible. Students who qualify for special education services, money does come in that way, but we don't want to qualify students just to get the money. That is the backwards way to where we want to get. We want to serve our students. We want to provide and focus on general education. What is happening in the general education classroom where we are serving our students. And as students rise up, as some do, we know that, and these are the areas in which we look at eligibility for that. So students who qualify, they must have an identified disability. And in addition to that, this is a three-prong approach. In addition to that disability has to have an adverse educational impact on their growth and progress within the general education setting. And in addition to that, so you might have an adverse educational impact, but that can be met with an accommodation in a 504 plan, and then that might not be a student who's eligible. So then the third criteria is looking at that those first two are met and they require specially designed instruction. And specially designed instruction is what's outlined in their individual education plan. So these are the areas in which students are identified as eligible for special education services. It goes through a comprehensive initial evaluation. And then after that, every 3 years, that evaluation is reviewed. Prior to that, we're looking at, what happens before? And so what are care teams with the schools doing? How are they serving students? And what does that look like, again, in the general education setting, in a course setting? And then looking at that. And then also looking at disproportionality. We have, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, and actually don't know if I have a time limit, so I'm just gonna keep going until I go. We also want to be mindful of that. We know that there's an overrepresentation of students of color in special education settings. And so we want to make sure that we're mindful of looking at all of those things very intentionally and thoughtfully, including the voice of the family and the student. That's a very critical piece of that part there. All righty. So just a very high level overview, in the Toccoa School District, we have about 14.8% of our students who qualify for special education services. And this is just, I wanna just show a picture of where we're at, just enrollment wise.
Interesting enough, the state cap is 15%.
Is 15, yeah, we're not quite there, almost.
Next year.
Yeah.
But they have for funding.
Yeah, yeah, so districts can get funded up to 15%, but if we have 20% of our students in, then we don't get funded for 5%. We only get.
I don't fix it, by the way.
They went from 13.5% up to 15%.
And then even within that, it's still underfunded, right? It's fully funding,
Yeah.
the
Correct.
needs of
Yeah,
it.
there's no probability that will happen. I mean, they're definitely steps in getting rid of it.
Yeah.
We'll see how that goes, but yeah,
And-
that's the point I made to several legislators, we don't get to say, I'm sorry, you're over.
Well, it's different, just special education and application.
Right.
It's something that didn't get funded last year.
Right,
But as we know, there's smaller buses, there's, all of those things, so, that is also a cost. But
Mhm.
we have-
there's a lot,
Yeah.
there's a lot of education, legislators out there on special education, so I'm pretty optimistic that they're gonna continue to work that.
Yeah, yeah. And at the same time, also funding for.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So I want to talk about our strengths, and I chose this photo specifically, these are some of our students in the Toccoa School District. And I chose this picture because when we're looking at special education services, it's very technical, there's a lot of moving pieces, there's a lot of parts. You got a lot of people that come together, and then there's an outcome. We want our students to learn and grow. And so I saw this picture and I was like, this is honestly kind of like a good visual. The kids look like they're collaborating. They look like they're building something, and I don't know what the outcome is at the end. I'd be curious to learn, but I just saw this picture and it spoke to me to think about like the strengths of our district and how that highlights our students who qualify for special education services. And I have no idea if these are students who do qualify, but
Yeah, I
just
should say.
the process.
One of the CP files.
Yeah. Yeah, so, so we have many strengths, many highlights, and I want to champion that as much as possible, because I think that, oftentimes when we're talking about special education services, we're talking about deficits, we're talking about areas of growth. And we have a lot of strengths, so looking at, a couple of things, just from a state level perspective, we just received our determination level, and we are a level 1, which means criteria and requirements, which is great. That means that we don't have any required action to provide to OSPI in some of the areas in which other districts might have to do. And I know that there was a question about like what's different from this year, from last year where we were a level 3. One of the criteria that the state looks at is our post-secondary outcomes, which is our next slide. And last year, our number size was less than 10. And so when that happens, the state uses a 3-year average, which took us from a level 3 to a level 1. So while it's a good thing, it's also an opportunity. We need to take a look further at this. And so it's a strength and it's an opportunity of an area that we can kind of focus and grow. But I was excited and wanted to share that as well.
Yeah, because I think I've been following this one for a while, and I think we've been in that level 3 for a while, and I think it's because of exactly the area you're talking about. So to say that we slipped by because we have less than 10, not exactly.
Yeah.
Positive celebration, I was hoping that there was something more substantive that we had done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I will say that what we can do is we can celebrate the fact that because we have a lot of work ahead of us and we have a new team, that we can celebrate is the fact that there's one less technical requirement to provide to the state, so we can focus on some other things, including this, because all of these things that our determination level tells us, they're all things that we have to focus on anyway. And it doesn't mean that we're not going to, it just means that we're not required to report some additional layers of things to the state. So that's what I'm celebrating, and I'm also looking at it as an opportunity, because everything that we do is, we're still mandated by.
Yeah, and I still like to see the post-secondary outcome measure, so that we can see if we're actually improving.
Yeah.
That's been an ongoing issue, and that's really important for students, are doing after they graduate.
Yeah.
So you're going,
Absolutely, and so for the next slide here, so this past year, and oh, sorry, back one. I had the opportunity to this year, it's not something that I would typically do, but I wanted to do it for two reasons. One, I didn't want to ask somebody else to do it. And two, I've never done it before, so I wanted to also know, like, it's important to me when we ask people to do something that we know what it is that we're doing. So I had the opportunity to call foster graduates and to call their families and talk with them about what are they doing now. Students who graduated in the 21-22 school year. And so thinking about like the indicators that the state is looking for our leavers is we're looking at, did they have a job that they were making money in the year after they graduated? Did they go on to educational opportunities in the year after they graduated? So I had the opportunity to talk with families. I talked to one student, the rest of them I talked to parents who were very proud parents, of what their students are doing. But it was a really fun opportunity to just reach out. And I don't know these students. In the future, I hope that I'll be calling or talking to families of students that I do get to know, but really thinking about what are they doing? What are they celebrating? So all of the families that I spoke to and connected with, I didn't connect with everybody. It's a lot of phone calls, leaving voicemails, that kind of a thing. It's not something that they necessarily care about as much as I care about. And so thinking about that, but all of the students and families that I spoke to, they all had a job, and 3 of them were in college and doing some things that were doing that. So again, the number size was small, it was over 10, but and an area in which we do continue to need to grow because we did have more students than that leave us in that year. And so really kind of looking at that, but it was really great to really think about like, what are we doing? Because the sole purpose of why any of us are here is preparing our students for what's next. We want them to be able to do what they want to do in their life after high school. They want to go to college? Yes, let's go. You want to get a job? Yes, let's go. You want to go to trade school? Yes, let's go. So that we want to make sure that they have the opportunity to do that. So anyways, I just wanted to share that because I was excited to talk to the families and students and do that.
Yeah, I love that. I think we could do a lot more of that, seeing how we perceive it or how our students are doing after they leave us, because that feeds back, it should feed back into, improving our system.
So Director Larson, do you want to join me in calls next year?
I was thinking if you have trouble getting a call back, do we need monitoring something or something? I don't know.
Yeah, I went to texting,
Yeah.
reaching out to their case managers, there's different strategies, but
Yeah,
at the end of the day, it was just really refreshing to be able to talk to students who are excited about what they were doing. So, and I'm excited to hear that somebody's checking in on them, which is also kind of nice. All right, so we also have some opportunities. We have a lot of opportunities. I think we might be going in the wrong direction here. Yeah, there we go. We've got a lot of opportunities, and really, this year being new, really focusing on a few things versus trying to do everything, because we know that doesn't work. And just really remaining steadfast on some key priorities so that we can get to the next ones. And so the first one is looking at safety net. So those who don't know, safety net is funding that we get from the state and federal government for students who have an IEP that is in excess of, they haven't published the amount, but the last year it was $37,599. So we fund up to that amount, and then we can apply for reimbursement from the state and federal government if we go over that current IEP. So this past year, we submitted safety net for 5 students. Currently, as of today, I've got 25 students on my list. Now, I wanna say, I don't wanna give a number that can go with that, because as we know, students move in and move out. So we could have a new student any day. We could have 10 of these students move out in the course of the next year. So that's when we do get to the place where we are submitting for funding, then we'll have a better idea of what the ask is. But we did have some missed opportunities to re-encumber some dollars last year, and so I'm committed to making sure that we can get back as much as possible, and what that means is, one, developing a system for review, making sure that we have that, and making sure that that review system is sustainable. It can be ongoing. If I go away, it stays here as a system that can be followed and tracked going forward. And what that means is that we're reviewing the IEPs, we're giving feedback to school teams to make sure a safety net IEP is an IEP. It's a compliant IEP. All IEPs should be compliant, and when it has a $200,000 price tag attached, we do go through it with a fine tooth comb to make sure that it's fully compliant.
Do you have any sense of how much, like I said, the safety net is the cost is above the kind of baseline? What percentage of the safety net dollars or the safety net allocated do we get back? If the base for a student is, making everything under 50,000, whatever, and this figure students have 200,000, that's $150,000. Do we get the safety net, get all of that?
So it won't be 50, I can promise you that, it'll probably be more like 38,000.
Okay,
Regardless,
yeah,
we pay that first 38,000. Anything
Well-
past 38,000, we can submit for reimbursement.
right,
Now, will they give it all back to
Yeah.
us is the question.
right,
Our goal is 100% of that. At the same time, what we will, when we get to that place, either Greg and I or whoever will set a goal probably of a target of 85% of money back, so that we can be more realistic. If we get 100%, fantastic. If we get 85%, that's still a
so
win.
I'm trying to understand the state, so the state is presumably has X amount of dollars, and so they're gonna take all the applications from all the districts and figure out how to distribute it, okay, so that's the cap, so that, and so we've been typically getting 85%?
Well, I don't have a percentage. What I do have is that last year we requested 499,000 and we got back 386. So
Okay.
we missed out on 112 of what we actually submitted. And that is far less than what we could have. And so
Okay,
to know, I don't wanna, say anything, it's just, what it really comes down to is systems. Like systems that are sustainable, that aren't reliant on one single person. And so that's another area that I really wanna focus this year, is building these systems so that these things are captured in a way that's not
Make sure
reliant
that
on.
every IEP that is eligible to be submitted gets.
Mhm.
And is this at a point in time number of students, or how is it determined? The number of students?
The number of. So. What the criteria that would get a student onto my running list of students would be, do they have additional staffing? Are they attending a non-public agency, an out-of-district placement? Additional staffing in the form of a one-to-one or a behavior technician, or do they need nursing support? Those are the areas in which, like, we would look at, are we allocating additional staffing, that kind of a thing? And so the criteria is really, we're required to meet the needs of a student. So it comes down to IEP teams to make decisions about what that looks like. And so that's why it's difficult from my perspective to say, like, this is what it is gonna be for the year. We can't put a cap on what our students need. Our students will tell us what they need.
But there's a time, so there's a timeline, there's an annual
Mhm.
process for submitting, and then, so it's usually within the IEP, so within the timeline, and then the process is completed when you have to submit it, which,
Yeah.
by the way, is very laborious.
Yes.
To then make sure everything's compliant, and you know,
All the financials are in place.
And then if there's an opportunity where we don't get as much as we request, then we can
appeal it.
We can appeal it.
But when you're talking about the difference between one student and 20 students, or 10 students and 20 students, is the difference that you don't know what those totals are gonna be? Or are those students gonna be in our district long enough? Is there a criteria for how long they have to be here? Or do they have to be here on a certain day?
Oh, yeah, no, so what I mean, like, with the 25 students, that's how many students right now that we have that do have allocated additional staffing. When it comes time to submit our applications, which we'll, we'll do that in March is the first one, and then we'll do it again in May. For those timelines, and then we can appeal after that. It'll depend on whether or not the amount of time we have had the student within our district. And did it exceed this threshold of $38,000? That's it.
Okay.
And so if we have a student that we allocated some staffing for and it took us to 50,000, we're still gonna try and get back that $13,000.
Even if maybe they
Even
left
if-
the district.
yes,
or something.
yes, exactly.
Thank you.
Okay, safety net, super fun. And then really looking at equitable access to core. And so, we talked a little bit earlier around disproportionality and eligibility. So we have been identified by the state as being disproportionate for, and if you look at the very bottom, indicator B10, which means that we, have a disproportionate and overrepresentation of students who are identified as Hispanic who are eligible in the category of specific learning disability. And so because of this, we are required to come up with a plan. We need to review our policies and structures that we have in place, really looking at our care team process, an opportunity to partner with the MLE department and looking at, making sure that we're looking at all of these different areas, so that we're not over identifying and over eligibility, which is not a word. Students who are Hispanic, Latino, and making sure that we're putting together a plan for that. And so that's a focus of this year, and partnering with school teams as well as the MLE department to look at that we're doing.
When they say disproportionate, what's the definition of disproportionate? Is it compared to the overall student population?
Yeah, so looking at students, and it's a risk ratio greater than 3. And so when they
Oh,
either,
Yeah, that is, it could be a lot of subtle things. that-
Yeah,
that would
yeah.
have a big number like that.
yeah, it's a lot that would go into that. And so in this area, this is where we are. It's not to say that we're not disproportionate in other areas, because we are just highly disproportionate here.
And how many of these students are what they call dual eligible?
That is a-
ELL.
Yeah, that's a question that is a great question that I don't have an answer to, but we can find that out.
Just curious.
The worst thing is a lot, it's many. We're gonna be partnering with the MLL, because we're making, based on the number of multilingual students, we are closer to 50%. Whereas in that many of the students are dual identified and might need to be triple identified. So
Yeah.
this in terms of like, thinking dental.
Yeah.
Specifically ML and special education, yes.
Yeah.
And we're sending it, and so we're better at taking more of a coordinated approach. Instead of the special ed department doing some work on this, it has to be a coordinated approach, because as we all know, we designed it for that specific student, it has all the credit that might benefit all the students.
Yeah. And another opportunity that we have is quality systems. And so really looking at, procedures that guide work, so that teachers, principals, school staff have processes they can follow, so that it gets very confusing and frustrating when you don't know who to go to or you don't know what to do. And so wanting to make sure that we have a practice guide, some kind of a manual that can help guide our teachers and support staff and everybody in how we support students. Everything from how do I order supplies to, I have a student who might need a change of placement, what do I do? And so really focus on like making sure that we have systems that drive that are sustainable, and again, not tied to one person, so that this is something that can be ongoing work that is just in service of our students and in the district of, like, these are processes and procedures that can guide us into the future. Not to say that they wouldn't need changed, as they would, absolutely need a review process, that kind of a thing. But one of the things by the end of the year is we're gonna have that in place. And as we talked about earlier, focusing on inclusionary practices, as Dr. Perdoza mentioned before, we are going to be part of the WASA Inclusionary Practices Project. And so we're very excited that they are giving us the opportunity to join and really focus on like, what does it look like to serve students in core? What does it look like to serve students in the general education setting? And how can we like increase opportunities for students to have access to core? Every time we pull students out of the classroom, we are taking them away from core instruction. And over time, that just helps further the gap of where they're at. And we don't want to do that as much as possible. And there are times where we do need to. And so basically focusing on that and making sure that we have training for staff, opportunities for that and all that. So we're very excited and we really want to make sure that our students at the end of the day feel like they belong, that they're in the classroom and that they belong there. They have meaningful friendships, they have meaningful participation, they have meaningful contributions to what's happening in the classroom. Is the ultimate goal that we want to get to, whatever that looks like for an individual student. It'll look very differently. And so to kind of finish us out, these are the things that I am committed to focusing on this year: publishing a practice guide, recapturing safety net dollars. One of the things I didn't go into, but I could have, is really looking at our agency contracts. We talked about it in the last board meeting around like this is, you know, we're reliant on a lot of agency contract support and we want to grow our own and have our staff as Tukwila staff member, team members. We are going to develop a disproportionality action plan and increase our inclusionary practices. So those are the big things that we're excited to focus on this year. I'm excited to dive in and would love any feedback from any of you and would love to, if anybody wants to sit down one-to-one, talk further about this. I will talk any day, all day about how we can support students who qualify for special education services. So. Any questions that you have that we didn't get through in the? Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk and, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was just gonna say, I really appreciate kind of your groundings at the beginning, and then with that last kind of quote slide. It's really clear that you're incredibly passionate about ensuring that all of our students, right, feel that sense of belonging and inclusion, and that really in the process of the way you talk about our students, and so I'm just so grateful for that. And again, thanks, I appreciate the ground centering us on that.
Thank you.
So that's incredibly informative. Thank you. All right, so we have to the strategic plan, and I'm sorry this is very refreshing, but you have 5 or 6. In my head, I had to move into the 6. Okay, it's not a regular session. Just kidding. Strategic plan, so the data analysis.
Good evening all, happy to be here also. I'm presenting this information for you. This presentation is is focusing on the analysis of the data we received from student results on 3 assessments. It's a Smarter Balanced Assessment SBA, which we'll just call the state test. You know, once per year, grades 3 through 8 in the 10th grade. iReady, which is reading and math, specifically grades K through 9, and then WIDA. I had to look this one up, I did. World Class Instructional Design and Assessment. So, and this is for all our students who are multilingual learners in grades K to 12. So we'll be looking at those 3 sources of data. And one thing I always want to throw out the front too is just our assumption. Anytime looking at the data, they actually, I will access numbers, but we also take it to human beings involved. So we always want to go into the assumption of saying all of our educators are doing the best they can with resources and training they've had available to them at the time. Their heart's in the right place. So we look at that with that lens and we say, okay, this is always data. This is a point to think, okay, that's where it is. It's not a blame, it's just saying, there we are. And what can we do to support our teachers and our educators so they are able to take the kids to the next level? We know they're very eager to do what they can, that's why they're in education. So it's, that we're passionate to find out what we can do to be supportive to them. So this is a high level analysis, and as we do pretty much all of our projects, the main lens we're looking through is equity and anti-racism, which is a big focus, even as administrators, we are looking under Dr. Pedros's leadership. So on slide 2, you see that it's primarily focused on goal 4, equity and empathy. But as you look through this lens, and probably if looking through any activity, that equity and empathy gives you the foundation for the other 3. You really need that equity and empathy basis. So we can go for the high expectations for all our kids and engaging the learners, because like I said, they know that they are known and loved and cared for. And then relationships between everybody, because this equity mindset that gives us builds the relationships with the human beings involved. Okay, next slide. So this, as you've seen before, this is a graph just showing the SWOT analysis, strengths, challenges, opportunities, and threats. It doesn't spell it correctly, but it's all for the sake of educational acronyms, we know those. So that's what we're looking at, looking data today, and also looking at what are those elements we were focusing on for our next steps forward. And also I think this has come up before, the question about, and teachers, I know in all my years of education, this always comes up, and it's a great question. The balance of how much time is spent on assessment versus how much time is left to actually teach. So, it is a challenge. Some of the assessments are mandatory, like the state test, and what grades are given, and that's the state decision. You receive public funds, and this is what you're gonna do. So I see those two as a smarter balance test is really a dipstick for the district. So in bigger districts, you have a broader range of data, so the data is not as volatile. You can make more of a district-wide trends understanding on that. We still look at school by school, but that's more what the purpose is for that. iReady is really targeted to each student, which is, I'm just personal bias, I think it's extremely helpful. And as you use iReady data, it tells you at the end what the student's level is, they're ready to the independent or the instructional level, right? Where you're ready to teach them, what skills are they ready to learn. And it gives a bank of reading materials that are at the independent level. So it's just much easier than instructional level. So a kid can, what they know, they're able to access that and go forward a lot of their self-driven, self-initiated learning on that. So that's some benefits that iReady. That one's given 3 times a year. And then Read It is for, again, for all students who are qualified as multilingual learners, and that's once per year. Oh, and then this slide is just, oh, sorry, go back. Just we call that with bold, rather than trying to go off too many questions for analysis, we're just looking at the ones, primarily focusing on the ones that are bolded. So who are underrepresented groups, and what can be the impacts, what are the barriers to more equitable outcomes, and what we do to mitigate the barriers. So that's how we look, our lens of looking at the data. So first up is smart balance assessment, the state test. So just want to a bit of, leave a little silent time just for directors to be able to read the main items we've called out. Because there's so many points of data you could pull from here, we decided to pull just a few strengths and a few challenges for each. If every time you're dying for deeper analysis, we could do that, but I thought this would be good to get us going. I want to call out just certain ones of each column for each of the tests. So on the strengths for smart balance, I feel like each of those 3 is worth calling out because it highlights a number of our schools that had scored above state averages and who had made significant improvements in different subject areas tested. So there's kudos to all of our schools for their growth and where they stand as a statewide average.
So just to clarify that, the first one, multilingual sort of above the state average in the LA for MLL students.
Yeah,
It's not above the state average.
correct.
We actually have in our district on occasion done that, where the MLL kids go above the state average for all kids, but in this case, you're talking.
Yeah, thank you, that's right. And for challenges, since again, looking at the anti-racism lens, equity, we noticed that students who identify as Latinx are lowest performing racial group in both math and science. So that tells us, a stepping off point, why might that be? We look for root causes, then we say, what can you do to support teachers as they're addressing that issue with their students?
I guess I look at the data, it's actually not just a Latinx students, and I'm a little concerned that,
Oh, yeah.
because I saw, depending on which cut of the data you look at, I mean, it's typically Latinx, Black students, Pacific Islander kids.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that tend to be, so I just don't want us to be forgetting some of those other ones.
It's a great point, and I had to write
Say something, your stat, that's not stat, I mean.
Oh, yeah.
Same statement, but.
Anyway, no, I mentioned bring out, but thank you for triggering my memory. It is, for this slide deck, we just call the ones who are the greatest outliers in norm. So there are others that we are still addressing based on gaps, but these are the ones that are the most prominent gaps to call out. Okay, next one. So I-READY assessment. So I want to call out the second bullet on strengths. Students identify as American Indian, Alaska Native, and students identify as 2 or more races had highest percentage of students at here's what they call early on and mid or above grade level placement in reading. That's a big title. It means here's grade level, you're kind of right there, you're still within a margin of error on grade or a little bit above. So that's kind of where you were hoping your kids are all going to get to. And future even higher than that. So I think it was often, these students are, as Director Larson called out, they might be some students who we worry about who maybe more in the gap. In this case, they actually have the highest percent at reading. So we thought it was worthy of note.
Actually, I did want to appreciate the fact that I think this is the first time where we've had the scores, the data presented at the same time as the teaching and learning analysis. So thank you very much for that, because that's been doing this for quite a while is, okay, data is nice, but what are you doing with it? So the fact that you're actually doing the analysis is great. The other, on the back on the SI, I did want to bring out one that I've been following for a while, which I think is important. That is the gaps in science scores between Tukwila Elementary, Cascade, and Thorndike. I mean, that is a very large gap, which is completely unacceptable. So hopefully we can pay some attention to that one.
Right, and it's a great way to talk about that on cabinet. Two perspectives on that. First, we're trying to really just dig into our strategic plan. So reading and language arts and math are our 2 core areas. So when there's a time constraint, if you have time to focus on either one or the other, those are going to get our highest priority. We know with foundation knowledge in math and reading, students have much more success with those subject areas. So it's kind of done. But we haven't overlooked that. We're talking about what might be a way to, Dr. Dino and I were talking today with Dr. Cardoza about if there's a possibility of even looking at, beefing up the science program and materials work. You talked about maybe the last meeting about some consistency across the schools, access to materials. And I think a lot of times that's because the teachers don't know, teachers generally don't ask for hardly anything. They just feel very self-sufficient. So we have extra dollars, so we're gonna see what's available and can we provide more resources? And, so they can even talk to each other and say, oh, you're using that works well. And it's like, well, what are you trying? I want to try that too, because they see what the successes are. So we need to offer teachers opportunities to learn from each other and they grow that way.
I would imagine that there is a correlation between that data point and the fact that there's not a science curriculum in elementary school too, right? Like that has an impact that, which I know I was surprised to find out at the last person we did, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all connected.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some history about that one, and it's very why that is, so there's a variety of things that are going on there. I just wanna, I appreciate the math and reading, but sometimes when there's huge gaps like that, science is actually critically important. And particularly since this district has invested heavily in the data learning labs, I mean, that's kind of something we did a number of years ago. And so it's really important that, students be getting equal access. I mean, it's an equity issue, basically, beyond just the reading and writing, or the reading and math thing.
Right, and we all look at balance of foundation of science core, what's aligned to NGSS science standards, and next generation science standards. And what materials and resources do we provide our teachers, so they'll have access to that. So they're not inventing everything, although we should be asking our teachers to do that. So that will be part of our ongoing work in the teaching and learning department to get into that and provide more resources for training. And there's still room for some creativity with your own kids, but also foundation. Everybody gets the skills you need to students to be able to meet the state standards in science. Hey. Then for Rita
Can you go
assessment.
back,
Oh.
can you go back and talk about highlight challenges?
Oh, yeah.
We didn't talk about that.
Thank you. Other challenges here, I just want to highlight the third of 3 in that column. And this was basically the number of students scoring 2 or more grade levels below standard, below their grade level, increases at each grade level as they'll really get in their district. The gap is bigger and bigger, except 4th grade it doesn't. So again, we might say, okay, what's happening then where they don't have that expanding of the gap? And how can we use those teachers' expertise of what they're doing that's working so well, share it with other teachers so they can have the same benefits for their kids?
And is that district wide?
Yeah, that's in the district as well.
So related to this, to more, behind, and I'm really interested in that particular area. And particularly how it relates to summer school. So, so we had a focus in summer school on students that are 2 or more grade levels behind. And we still, I don't think, have really ever determined whether summer school quote worked or not on that particular issue. And I'm still looking for, whether, the initial analysis of what happened was, did some looking and compared the iReady scores and came up, well, it didn't get any worse. So, we didn't have summer slide, which, okay, first of all, that's a really low bar. I hope we have higher bar than that for summer school. And because we've done it in the past, we've seen some significant improvements. And the second thing, you really don't know about summer slide until you look at the fall iReady. That's the summer slide is between spring and fall. So I hope that analysis can still get done, because I think it's important to do this analysis of summer school to say, if it's not producing some significant increase for the students, then, we gotta be examining that and doing something else, or, whatever the situation is. So I think it's a really, I really would still like to see that analysis of, now that the students, took their fall iReady, and those students that went into summer school, did, and I understand iReady doesn't necessarily do the growth measure, but you can, use scale scores to see if they actually grew. And if they didn't, then we should be out, should say, okay, well, why didn't they? I mean, what was the deal there? So I just wanted to bring that one up, so that, because as we think about summer school for next year, I know this last year, there's a big emphasis on the project-based learning, which is great. But at the same time, we should be able to have project-based learning and improvement in academic sort, academic reading and math in particular, as well, particularly for those that are doing great.
So that's really a great point that I think, and I'm thinking about my previous districts where I've been overseeing summer school. So in my Oregon district, we looked at the same, we didn't have an established formally designed, scientifically designed assessment that would measure specifically that period of time or those same skills after kids had a few weeks off and they came back in fall, how much was forgotten there. So because iReady isn't really set up for that direct comparison, we thought, well, if we can't have that, what can we do? So in that case, maybe here too, we will look at the teachers who are involved and get together to create what would be a pre-post for specific skills that are being taught in summer school. Then you can measure those specific skills and show the growth. And then when the teachers say, when there is classroom-based assessment in the fall with the same skills, they can look at that. So I have these 3 kids in summer school. I see that they all are 7 points ahead of all my other kids who didn't go to summer school. That's more information style. So I think we'll just have the next several months to get creative and find something like that that's manageable for time for teachers to actually pull together with energy and the bandwidth to do that, but also it measures that chunk of time. And then, hopefully carry forward of the knowledge and learned. And so it's not forgotten the after summer school and for the 3 weeks later before school year begins.
Right.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of a question about, particularly kindergartners. Do we collect information on if incoming kindergartners have attended any sort of, pre-K early learning program? And then is there a way to like disaggregate the data to say those that did attend, right, are, maybe more in that early on grade level or above versus these ones that didn't? Is there any way to see that, or do we collect that data?
I think we have access to data for who has been
Yeah.
in the preschool programs, but it could be challenging to draw a direct association because the skills they're teaching might not be the exact same skills with this next depth of knowledge level, the next grade. So scientifically, I'm not sure what the validity of this assessment, but you can do enough of a comparison to show. My guess would be that it's gonna be a significant difference, not a little bit. It'll depend on what usually what you had a balance of academic and social.
That's the thing too, there are so many different preschools
Yes.
and so many different approaches to.
There's a good preschool, really focused on organized play and socializing. That's great. They will be much better at that, but maybe not academically because they didn't get any foundational academics. Another program that's strictly credited with academics, you might see fact memorization, but teachers are gonna spend a lot of time doing socialization. Yeah. So I think I didn't just really know that those programs have state or federal parameters of what they teach and the outcomes. So I think it's that would be possible to see what the differences are versus students who did not have any formalized instructional opportunities before they got there.
I guess I have a question too about what students are being invited to go to summer school. Is there different criteria each year, or are we pretty consistent, for the same growth? Is it because a certain population has been requested to attend? I don't know. I know there's a question about who was it.
Yeah, well, I think that relates a lot to even those of us who've been principals and maybe a series of action that go into an extended learning or summer school. Some places look at, one of my previous districts when I was principal, a colleague principal decided to, we had similar student demographics, they said, okay, we're gonna focus on kids who are just barely below standard. Well, they segregated down to below their standard because they were almost there already. My school said, we're gonna go for kids who are the biggest gaps in the most. We thought kids grow up, but here's the bottom. And they grew year to year, we were really happy with that, but they might not have got it here, but they're ready to get it. So our dad was like, well, how come you only got 3%? Well, when we had 100%, we made,
It's all about growth, isn't it?
Yeah, so.
Yeah, I hate that, they look for the kids that are really close and then try to, no. The kids that need the most or that are farthest from education, those are the ones we want to focus on.
And if the goal is to bring as many kids as possible, just above the bar, so there's a bigger critical mass of students in the classroom who can be good partner learners with the rest of the kids. That is one area of action. If you're looking at, providing some equity and opportunity, then you would go with the kids who have the greatest needs.
For me, it was not to what the purpose of summer school.
Yeah.
And we need to get really find out on that.
Yeah, and there's we have multiple purposes for our summer school, but one of them I think should be an academic.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
And Dr. Dina, do you?
Yeah, so what I can talk about is how kids were selected for last year versus the 1 year before. So for this summer school, this previous summer, I guess in 2023, we invited every student who scored two or more grade levels below in the winter iReady assessment. And of that, we identified roughly 600 students, so we were planning to serve 600 students in summer school. Of that group, about half of them accepted the invitation. The other half did not, for whatever reason, parents made choices. And then since we'd still planned for roughly 600 students, then in April, we opened it up to anyone who wanted to register for summer school. So the first kind of bite at the apple were the students who were 2 or more grade levels below. And then we opened it up for anyone else after that April window. The previous year, it had been done solely by teacher referral and application, and not every school used the same criteria, like the same objective criteria to assign students. So the part of what last year's summer program was trying to mitigate was every school doing a little different, like line in terms of who they were inviting to summer school to do it that way. And like I said, we didn't end up with all of the kids who we had initially identified as choosing to participate. And so while this purpose of it was for those students 2 or more grade levels below, and we also developed structured literacy blocks for summer school, which previously the summer school staff had said that they each designed their own instruction. And so for this past summer, our summer school coordinator developed like specific instructional blocks, and we purchased a lot of books and materials so that they could do read alouds in small groups and other things just specifically in summer school. We did the STEM kits for math and science, and one of the things that we learned from there is that we also want to add in more direct math instruction for next year, not just the STEM kits themselves. Obviously, it's not perfect, and for this upcoming school year, or for this upcoming summer, we'll want to identify who that group is, but that's how the students were chosen and what the curriculum was.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, that's what I heard, you talking to different school board use, do project-based learning, and there also needs to be the appropriate level, sometimes direct instruction, you have to make that, find that balance to make it really work well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's ready to go on to our next, or Alida. So the first of the 2 bullets I wanted to call out. So several students of grade levels identified there outperformed their cohort at the state level in percent progressing. So on target to exit the program within 6 years. So if you're on target to grow several grades, we want kids out the growth of statewide. And the challenges, second one I would like to call out for this presentation, something for us to really put our heads together on. Of the 353 multilingual students in Tukwila who have been qualified for services for 6 or more years, 77, so about 3/4 of those kids have been enrolled in Tukwila for 6 or more years. So that tells us, okay, what can we do to help support the multilingual learning if we have that many kids who've been in program 6 years and still they haven't exited based on proficiency in English.
I appreciate that, it's such important data point. I think, we even talked about, there's so many different entry points, right, for students. And so oftentimes that can be a way of being like, oh, if they, came in the 8th grade, right, of course it might take them, yeah, so I think that's just an important data point during that.
So, yeah, I really like this, we had this, last year, this, kind of part of the, this, what grade you're in versus how many years they've been, which, to me, so I've always, for a number of years, expected we have way too many students that have been, too long a time, so over 10, this kind of lesson. And so, and in particular, it's always bothered me that, there's way too many of them, children, and so how did it get there? Well, then you go back to elementary school and say, okay, so why are they, staying in there so long in elementary school? And so that to me is one of the key measures that we should be looking at. And so there's 2 things. One is the state provides, one is the percent that have exited, that is get out of the yellow status every year. And then the other one, which is really good, is what they call percent progressing. So what percent of the students are moving at a rate that they're going to get out within 6 years? So, the data here was presented was just the proficiency levels in WIDA. That's interesting, but what I'm much more interested in is in growth and moving. And when I was actually looking at this, there's some really good things that happened last year. I think we had, so if I focus in on the elementary schools, for example, which is kind of the core of this. I think the previous, we went So the previous year we had a 4.55 average exit rate at elementary schools and last year we went up to 6.8. So significant improvement in the number of students and the number of students that were progressing. The previous year was 33%, this year it's 49% this year. So I know, that Dr. Dino, we talked about a lot of the things that, there's two things going on. First of all, he is relatively new, and I've observed over the years, every time it's new, it takes the system, a year to kind of absorb it. But also, I think there's some fairly intentional things that he did last year to get, and it seems to have produced some really nice results. So I wonder if you could just remind us about some of the things that that were actually implemented last year.
Yeah, certainly. So I want to connect back to what Ms. Mon shared in her presentation. Our focus since I got here was really on inclusion for our multilingual students. Tukwila had relied heavily on intervention and pull-out, like isolation strategies for kids, which takes them out of their core instruction, which doesn't help them do well on WIDA or SBA or anything else. And so we started working pretty intentionally with MLL staff last year on some of those inclusionary practices, working on how to provide accommodations in the classroom, keeping kids in the room, working on, we did a lot of work in the spring on oral language development using an ORC toolkit that the team had come back when we went to the PAVE conference. And then we're working more this year, but some of the key features, I guess, in terms of with students is keeping them in their classroom, which is why I think you see things more in elementary school than in the secondary school. We made some changes for high school this year specifically that I'm hoping we'll see some results from that, but more in the classroom and more working with general education staff to ensure that they understand how to use the tools that they have available to them. We're moving away, and WIDA is really helping us, especially with the standards and using we did a lot of training with staff on the can do descriptors, like what kids can do, so we're not focused on what they don't have, but we're focused on where they're at. And the inclusion parts, the shift in the paradigm, right, is from, we all remember back in fall, to take the kids out and you teach them things like survival, English, colors, holidays, whatever, and then you bring them back in their fix. Like, that didn't work for kids then, and so we're working on ways to do things now. But I think a lot of the work that the teachers and staff did specifically to learn about the WIDA standards and how to incorporate language and content together while they're instructing resulted in these gains at the elementary level in particular.
Yeah, that's really, just put that a couple of them, like first grade at Tukwila Elementary, the state average was 8.1. This is exit rate in Tukwila Elementary, 15, it's like twice. And fourth grade at SBU was state average is 13 and they did 15. So there's some really nice, nice effective things that were working. So hopefully we can continue on with all that stuff. And I think, also the kind of the theory of WIDA is it's much more aligned to the state. It's common core agenda, so there's that.
Yep.
So over the years, that will kind of, I think, produce good results. So anyway, I just wanted to congratulate everybody on the work that they did last year on that. But it looks like there's some really nice.
And the work continues, the work's continuing.
Oh, yeah.
The multilingual learning labs, the focus, as a K-8 focus, the shift structurally at the high school, working on that. Like I said, we're trying to be adaptive, right? So as we launch a systemic change, which is, a hard shift for folks sometimes. Sometimes it's easier for others. Something takes a while to think about what does it mean? That's the question we talked about. So what does it mean to build your capacity to support all our students in core instruction? Like, what does that actually look like? Whether it's special education, whether it's multilingual learners, what does that look like to build that? Also recognizing there are situations and there are requirements and there are situations and instructional needs where students do need a different kind of support. So having said that, we understand that that's not going to go away, but we can think about how we can do some, be very intentional around what we're focusing on for the core. And I will say this, and I'll say this many, many times, inclusionary practices is about general education. It's a general education initiative. It's not a special ed initiative. It's not an ML initiative. It is a general education initiative. And so that means what are we doing to support our general education teachers, our core instructors, to build their capacity to support our kids. And we're starting that work. We're continuing that work and building that out. And we will continue to adapt and support as we go along each step of the way. So it's nice to have this data to reflect some of that work and that we're building that up in the formats. So.
And one other thing, so, going back to the strategic plan, the goal related to MLS is 100% of MLS to qualify for English language skills, sort of will meet the criteria set forth, blah, 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 within 5 years. So, I would like, first of all, that's an aspirational goal. I'm always suspicious of these 100% because you can never achieve 100%, but you can aspire to get there. And so I would like to see that more translated into some specific SMART goals related to, the exit rate related to the percent progressing, and those kinds of things that we're showing some good progress on. Because those we can set incremental goals from year to year, and so to try to achieve them. So I hope we can translate that into something a little more along the line of SMART goals. The other thing I was interested in was this elevation platform, and maybe we'll hear some more about that. That was kind of new to me. I don't know. It purports to, I guess, measure growth, and this is probably a separate discussion. I'd like to see what growth measures. I think we have some pretty good growth measures, at least at the high level. Now, elevation may be more at the, like iReady, more at the lower levels. I don't know, but.
Dr. Dino has a lot of expertise in this.
So elevation is the data dashboard for multilingual students, and it pulls in their WIDA annual data, it pulls in their WIDA screener data, which is when they qualify for services. It pulls in their iReady data and it pulls in their SBA data. So what it allows teachers to do is determine filters, like I want to see all the kids who were the developing level on WIDA, what was their corresponding SBA score? And so you can pull things up. It can help us measure growth, but what it really is a super user-friendly dashboard where all of that information is in one place and it's teacher-friendly. Not that pulling information out of all these different databases, which is, but I think our assessment charge is really low, isn't important, but it's not super user-friendly at the teacher level. And then the other, there's two other like communication tools within Elevation. It has all of the required parent letters translated in like 40 or 50 languages so that we can send out, because when kids assess, they get a letter in the fall that says you continue to qualify or you exited, and it comes in all sorts of languages, very tailored to the student. And then the other piece is teachers can, and ML staff can develop student plans. And so if for example, at the secondary level, I'm a math teacher and I want to see all my kids who scored at the level 2 on WIDA, and I work with the ML staff and we decide like these are the 3 things we're going to do for all of these students. It creates a plan and then we can go in and record over time like notes of what we're doing with those plans. So it's a data dashboard targeted to MLs. It's not a new like assessment for kids or anything. We're doing we've done 2 trainings so far with multilingual staff and principals, and then tomorrow we have a district-wide training for any staff, and all staff have been invited to join the team. This came to us as a request from one of our principals, and so that school is really like already starting to dig in. It is a cost that we're able to use our categorical funds for, so it's a pilot for us this year. If we determine that it's been a good use of our funds and time, we can continue to do it without any like hit to our budget.
Interesting, it sounds like a long time ago we had Aaron in the phone room.
Similar to, it does a couple of other things.
Yeah, and except it's focused on ML students as opposed
Yeah.
to students in general, but it sounds like, okay, so it's more of a teacher focused system.
And like from some of these data points here were super easy for me to pull from Elevation.
Okay.
Like it was maybe 3 clicks of the button to find of the 353 that it was 77%. Whereas last year when I went to do it, I had to do a data mining report from Skyward that probably took like half an hour. And so from a macro level too, it's an easy place to pull
Yeah,
call information, and
Yeah.
I'm working now on that spreadsheet that you want with the updates.
yeah, because that, I mean, I like to see some goals in there to, you know, kind of reduce over time, reduce those numbers, particularly those students that are way out there. Figure out how to do that, so, okay, that's great.
I would say that staff is really excited about it, because it is user friendly, and I think for teachers, you know, they're always looking for how can we bring kids differently, how can we, for things that flexible thinking, and we're really understanding how the assessment in real time, so that we can make some decisions, and I think, but people are really excited about it, so.
Yeah, it is, because I think homeroom, we never had a lot of problems like this, and we just never seemed to take off, but hopefully this one will be good.
Okay, then our slide 8. Opportunities and threats. Again, there are several each that have been identified, but of this list for the opportunities, I just want to call out the one that's development of scope and sequence for English language arts. And that's just, you know, a district with a very small teacher and learning department. There's only so fast they can crank out scopes and sequences. So we're, but you know, we have math, we have arts, all different types of art. We have several, but we gotta keep going. So ELA is the next biggie. So, and I know teachers have mentioned when I've done classroom and school visits, they'll say, we have a guide. We're ready to teach two scales. What are they? So great question. So that's, and it's, we want to make sure the process we do involve the voice and make sure their product ends up being really usable to teachers and planning. So that's what I want to call it out, because that's a great opportunity. I really think with that, over time, we're going to see a big boost in student achievement. Because remember, you can teach wonderfully to a standard that isn't tested anywhere. And you'll never see a result of the test. You, and the students, enrichment of life, you can see it, but you won't see it on an assessment result. So with these assessments, we want to say, okay, this is what's been decided, the goals that we want all our kids to have to get ready for the next level, and then college and happy adult life. So we want to make sure we provide teachers with those opportunities. And first, threats. There's a number of them here, and budget, that's no surprise to anybody. It's, you know, pretty much every district is facing that challenge. And quite a high percent of students and staff absences this year. And the last one, current intervention design. The design we have now for interventions, as much as district, we're not seeing the results in long-term student growth. So we know it's not the lack of trying or what's trying to make it work, but we don't quite know why is it. So we're kind of looking at the mindset of how do we structure the schedules of days so all the kids get as much as possible time in the core instruction, because teachers always say they can use more time, and they're right. And then intervention really should be, for the most part, it's not instead of core, it's in addition. So that's what we're going to be working on. It's kind of a big challenge. If, you know, those who taught, you know that it's a scheduling is a big challenge, but yeah, what it's a threat that something else we want to work on.
So to throw out, and then play about for you, so we used to have I was thinking about intervention versus the coaching model. And we've gone through various cycles of those over the years, but the times where we've had some of the best assessment results have been when we had a really high quality coaching model going on versus, and so I assume also there's intervention versus inclusionary models, all that stuff going on, but it seems like, yeah, I mean, we had a much better situation where we had, you know, coaches instead of interventionists, so there was more focus on inclusion in the classroom, and that seemed to work better, so.
Yeah, I've seen that work really well elsewhere too. And it makes sense if you're the teacher of the classroom, there's a trusted expert who comes and works with you side by side, not evaluative, but saying, hey, how about I try this, I'll show you how this works. That teacher can learn by watching, attach for college and try it out. So yeah, there's huge potential benefit in coaching.
Unfortunately, we had a previous superintendent that at some point decided to get rid of all coaches, which that was a bad decision, but anyway.
But I think at that time, we had a lot more personnel in the classroom, we had a lot more IAs and heroes in our classrooms than we do now. So I wonder if that's a factor also.
Financial situations of districts have changed a lot in the last several years. And then slide 9, teaching and learning next steps. I'm calling out the third one down here, so you can bold it. Development of updated scope and sequence, we talked about that a little bit. and development of district-wide MTSS understanding and implementation. A lot of you might know MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support. And you often will, if you ever Google it, you'll see almost, there's millions of hits, but it's kind of based on a triangle shape. You'd say the bottom of the triangle is core instruction. What happens with the classroom teacher with her or his own kids for the core time? And that should get kids in the model to proficiency. Like 85% of the kids' needs will be addressed there. Sometimes kids need more. That might be intervention, not replacing the good core instruction, but in addition. Or with extra support built in, so it's still the classroom learning, but more. And that would be maybe 10% of 10 to 15 at the most who would need that. And then the 1 to 5% at the very top of the pyramid, and that's to read something significantly different. Because what else we're trying to the best we can, it's just not working, so we need to try something significantly different. And then sometimes you will hear and teachers and principals say, because they are worried about their kids, they want to do well, they say, well, our pyramid look like this, it's kind of like, no, it's straight up, or it's even like that. So then you have to look at, and that's how COVID is still affecting our classrooms. 2 years of not having standard instruction. So we know that's true, and that's true everywhere, so we just take it from there. But we still look at here are your group of kids, here's your data that says where they are. Okay, you still, whatever group of kids, you're gonna have about that 85% who are, or they're, most of your kids, your strong core instruction will still suit almost everybody every time. So you start with that, whatever level they're on. Again, say anyone below grade level is automatically a tier 2. That's not how it works. So that's the whole MTSS is a very comprehensive model, and so we're going to keep on working on that to provide the most support we can to schools, so they can make that work. Then going down ways to the math pilot to identify appropriate materials. So that's underway now. Then at the very bottom, last bullet, principal leadership support through anti-racism, professional learning and coaching. We've got that going. We had a session today, a 2-hour session with doctors Rogers Ard and House, and led us through another process with school and district leaders. The goal there, series of action is if we build up the skill and expertise and the will and the courage to go out and lead this way, then that will be what they can carry out to schools and successfully guide their school staff to go forward with that. And that is it. I'm happy to respond to any questions you have or concerns.
The math is that's elementary math.
Yes.
How's that going? It's going well, yeah.
Started with these two.
Yeah, it's a continuation.
Yeah.
Essentially here,
Yeah.
but it's progressive. So we hope to have some kind of resolution before the end of the year. Yeah, that's the goal.
Thank you. Okay, this is thank you so much. This gives us just a little bit of time to focus on the procedure, 620. So this is something that the board had asked several months ago that this be just kind of revisited. And so I know Dr. Pedrosa worked with Dr. Morris, and also with the feedback from the rest of the board to just make some updates to this policy. So this is all around communication. So communication between board members and staff, communication from staff to board members, and so on. So we'll just take a few minutes to talk about it. I think it'd be great if we could get this to a place where we could, well, I guess it doesn't need to be approved, it's procedure. So great. So just some thoughts if there's anything that folks want to, request that might get reviewed again or look at or changed.
And I understand you took this to your admin.
They're looking at it, but we're gonna get some additional feedback, but I wanna make sure that I brought this very transparently, everyone here, and yeah.
You good, man?
I appreciate particularly in like the very first paragraph, the addition of the word official. So I think there's been a lot of tension throughout the district regarding folks feeling like they're
feeling like they can't just come and have an unofficial conversation, right, with the board member or, bring something up, so I appreciate it, I don't know what the intent of that was, but, I think that can be, that'll be really beneficial. Moving forward, that, so it doesn't create just like a barrier or a level of, I can't do this, so I appreciate that.
I do have one question, and I like the changes that have been made, but in the second to the last paragraph, when you receive a complaint, the board member should acknowledge, we have the practice of if it's sent to all of us, it's only the chair that responds, or the president that responds. Does that need to stay that there, or is it asking each of us to respond?
I wonder if that could be, if that would be something that would be written in maybe our board procedures or, you know, somewhere else in someone else, because I mean, I don't think it necessarily matters for the purposes of this procedure, of who the response is coming from, just that it's happening. But I think we should definitely outline that somewhere.
I've gotten practice with the president, but if the president was yearly, be the vice president, so that would have to be spelled out, correct? Is what you're asking, and then people are like, ooh,
Then we know somebody has responded,
yeah.
and all of us don't need to.
Okay. And I'd also like to express appreciation for them for helping with this. Yes. Thank you, Debbie. Prodding along.
Yes.
We weren't non-violent. So I just wanted to, are there any other feedback, fresh eyes on this? Okay, if there's something comes up, because I know other people are processors, let me know, okay? I just want to make sure that we put this in practice. We've been talking about this for a while, so I wanted to get this on.
Do you feel like there are any updates that need to be made to the policy, supports the procedure?
I think the policy itself is pretty,
It's pretty.
it's pretty broad. Yeah, it's pretty broad. Okay.
Great.
Yeah, I feel like this is more as being like it's for me, it's always the what, that's most important. It's just more clarifying. Yeah. And what, so that way people know what they can and can't do. Yeah, and we're gonna CC you when you do it. Depending on what it is, but thanks for the feedback. All right.
Great, so we don't have time to get into the race and equity component, but I just wanted to share what that was about, because we'll wanna pick that up soon, for our January, professional development, interprofessional development, but, at our last professional development opportunity, with Dr. Rogers in Knaus, we were kind of charged with the work of thinking about what is our board response to criticism, to pushback, to, you know, whatever it may be regarding our stance on the curriculum that we're teaching, specifically around race, specifically around gender, and those types of things. And so, because it will come, even if it hasn't yet, it will likely come. And so just being really firm, and together and concise on what our messaging is and why. So we'll spend a little bit of time doing that, but I guess maybe what I could ask of all the board members is to just kind of maybe start thinking about and drafting what might your personal response be. And then we can come together to collectively create a board response that aligns with each of our individual values as well as our district priorities and mission and vision and values. So that's what that was, and that's what we'll do in the future. But anything else?
That would be helpful if I knew what we were teaching and how we're, you know, for me being here, that would be helpful if I could get that somehow.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a great, great point, yes. Great, the other piece that we were gonna kind of talk a little bit about here is, you know, what are the things that are important to us as a district that we want to make sure that we can really capture in policy. For instance, book banning, right, has been a thing that has been happening all over our country. And, you know, so what is it that we might want to put in place, that isn't in place yet, or a policy that might need to be strengthened to really ensure that, again, there's alignment in our future, around some of those priorities. So maybe just kind of, again, thinking a little bit about those. I know what policies exist, there's a million, I don't even know all of them. So for now, it might just be like brainstorming, these are the things that I think are really important, that I wanna make sure we have a policy around, and that's when we can go for our policy master, or all-knowing of the policies over there, this core, who can say, oh yeah, this is that policy we have, here it is, so that we can adjust it, or this is a policy that doesn't exist yet. So. Yeah. Great.
Yeah, interesting on the curriculum, it's actually been a long time since the board has had a curriculum in front of us.
It's true, yeah.
And so, yeah, that's a really good
Well,
question.
you'll soon have a math one.
Yeah, but it's been actually. Yeah, on these particular issues, you know, I don't know what's being done. I mean, we can certainly put the words together about, you know, feelings about things, but it's actually positive.
Are you guys studying like a curriculum or a studies curriculum or just all of it?
I mean,
I mean, that's the question, because it's
Yeah.
really multi-layered, right?
yeah, it is.
So I guess we have to just decide if that was it. Maybe that's something where, so sorry, to put this on the instructional council. But maybe that is something the instructional council can do in terms of providing some high level information, especially to the new board members, around what are the things that you guys have done over the last 3 years, maybe, in terms of where we're at. And then what are you looking at for the future, right? So like where you were in the past, where you are right now, what's coming.
So that's actually a project we've been working on, trying to gather what all is being taught in the different content areas of the different schools. And then using that to identify priorities for scope and sequence development across content areas, as well as a new adoption plan. So we're in process with gathering that information.
So that maybe we can look ahead to the future work session.
Absolutely.
And think about where we can embed that in here so that we can do a thorough update of the board on all of those pieces.
So I mean, it's a whole bunch of, you know, kind of buzzwords that are.
Yes.
Critical race theory, gender studies,
Yes,
history, I mean, there's a whole collection of
Yeah,
things that are
that's true.
popping up in the world, and so how we kind of organize that is some kind of rational.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we can do that.
All right, awesome, thank you. All right, well, can we get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you all so much.
I'm trying to get the time to-
Good.